Hey, I'm John Gordon with Positive University, and today my guest is James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits. How you doing, James?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on. It's nice to talk to you.
Great talking to you. So let's get right into the book. Why did you want to write this book, Atomic Habits, and why did you call it Atomic Habits?
Yeah. Well, I chose the phrase atomic habits for three reasons. So the first reason is one that you might expect. Like the first meaning of the word atomic is tiny or small, like an atom. And that is a core piece of my philosophy. Like habits should be small and easy to do. But then the second meaning, and the one that's often overlooked, is that atomic can also mean the fundamental unit in a larger system. So like atoms build into molecules, molecules build into compounds, and so on. And I think in a lot of ways, we could say that habits are kind of like the atoms of our lives. They're like these little fundamental units or routines. And when you put them all together into a larger system, you end up with, kind of your daily routine or the outcomes of your life. And then the third and final meaning is the source of immense energy or power. And so I think if you combine all three of those, you kind of understand the narrative arc of the book, which is if you make changes that are small and easy to do, and you layer them on top of each other like units in a larger system, then you can end up with some really powerful or remarkable results in the long run. And that also answers your first question of why write this book, why write about habits. And I think the answer is habits are like the compound interest of self-improvement. They're these little things that don't seem like much on any given day, and they can work for you or against you. And it's easy to overlook the power of those daily choices. But if you can master them, then they really start to compound in the long run and can turn into some really powerful outcomes if you stick with it.
I remember when Joshua Medcalf introduced us a few years ago, and you were writing a lot, very prolific writer. You had a blog and just sharing a lot of great content, but you waited to write this book. I thought you could have written a book years ago. Why did you wait this long to write this book now?
I'm just a slow learner. Actually, this is kind of, for whatever reason, this is, there's a somewhat of a pattern of this with me. Like I probably waited a year too long to hire my first employee. Now, I guess better to wait a year too long than do it a year too early. You might not have a business if you move too quickly. But yeah, for whatever reason, I kind of take my time on things. That said, for this particular book, habits and human behavior is a big and complex topic, perhaps the most complex. I mean, there's famously there are like as many cells or atoms in the brain as there are stars in the universe. It's an incredibly complex system that you're dealing with. And so anyway, my point is that I needed time to do the reading, to do the work, to find out how things actually worked and to research this book. So I wrote about habits and behavior change for 3 years before getting the book deal, which is what you were mentioning. And then after signing the book deal, I did research and wrote the book for 3 years. So it's really been a 6-year process to get to the finished product. My hope or my goal was very ambitious. I wanted to write the definitive book on how habits work and how to change them. And both of those elements were really important to me. Like I wanted to understand the science of it. So why do we do this? How do habits actually get formed? And I wanted to understand the practical application, which I feel like was missing from some of the other books on the topic. I want people to be able to read it and say, okay, this is what I need to do to build a good habit or break a bad one. And it took a while to feel like I had properly researched that and put the ideas together.
So this will appear around New Year's. So let's talk about New Year's resolutions, habits that people want to create for the new year. Let's say I want to start a new habit this New Year's. I want to eat better. I want to eat more healthy, or I want to start a new fitness routine. Can you give me just a few tips of what I could do to get started immediately without obviously giving the whole book away, but what are some tangible, practical ways that I can get started?
Sure. Yeah, there are a lot of things to talk about. So I'll focus on two things to start. So first thing is a lot of the time when people set a New Year's resolution, what you're basically doing is setting a goal, and they do things, they'll say things like, I want to lose 40 pounds this year, or, I want to stick to my diet 5 days a week or something like that. And so instead of focusing on the outcome, my first suggestion would be to flip it around and focus on the identity, focus on the type of person that you want to become. So the question to ask might be something like, all right, who is the type of person that could lose 40 pounds? Well, maybe it's the type of person who doesn't miss workouts. And so then your focus shifts from what the number is on the scale to being the kind of person who shows up every day, even if that only means you did 5 push-ups or something like that. Basically, the way I like to think about it is every action you take casts a vote for the type of person that you believe that you are. And so the first time you do something, the first time I sat down and wrote an article, I didn't magically think of myself as a writer after that day. But by showing up again and again and kind of casting these votes, you start to build up evidence of that identity. And at some point, you cross this invisible threshold and you're like, oh, I guess maybe I am a writer, or maybe I am a meditator, or maybe I am a fit person. And so I think my approach is to let the behavior drive the beliefs. Start with a small action and let that reinforce this new identity. So that's the first aspect. And then the second thing, and this is more tactical, is if you're looking to build a better habit, I like to recommend people start by using what I call the 2-minute rule. And so the basic way it works is you take whatever habit you're trying to build and you scale it down to just the first 2 minutes. So, read 1 book every month becomes read 1 page, or do yoga 4 days a week becomes take out your yoga mat. And sometimes that sounds silly to people because they're like, well, I know the real goal is to actually work out, right? The real goal is to take out my yoga mat or just put on my running shoes or something like that. But the key insight here, and my favorite story of this, I had a reader who he ended up losing over 100 pounds, but in the beginning, he did something a little strange, which is that he went to the gym, but he wasn't allowed to stay for longer than 5 minutes. So he would drive to the gym, get out, do half an exercise, get back in the car, drive home. And it sounds crazy to people at first because they're like, well, that's not going to do anything. Like, that's not going to get him in shape. But what you realize is that he was mastering the art of showing up. He was becoming the type of person that went to the gym 4 days a week. And once he was that kind of person, then you've got options. And that's a key insight about all habits. A habit must be established before it can be improved. So much of the time we're looking at how do we find the perfect diet plan, the ideal business, side business idea, the best workout program. We're so focused on optimizing that we don't do the thing that matters most, the most fundamental thing, which is, can you become the type of person that shows up? And the 2-minute rule helps you do that. So scale it down to 2 minutes or less, build a new identity and become the type of person who's doing it each day, even if it's in a small way. And then you can increase the intensity later.
What about the habit before the habit? So to work out, what I have found for me, every day I will get changed in the morning. So if I put my workout gear on in the morning, I'm much more likely to go out and work out. So that's actually a habit before the habit. Talk about that and how important that is. And what do you call those in atomic habits?
Sure. So I like the way you phrased it because there often are habits before habits like that. So you mentioned changing your workout clothes. That's actually the one for me for my exercise routine. That's the only thing I think about is, do I change my workout clothes or not? Because if I can do that, the next 2 hours are already decided. I'll get in the car, I'll go to the gym, I'll do all the rest if I've already changed. Another one that I often recommend to people is if you want to read more, when you make your bed in the morning, put a book on your pillow. So you make the bed, put the book on the pillow. That's like the habit before the habit. So you climb into bed and it's waiting for you there to read a page when you go and get in bed at night and then you go to sleep. And most of these kinds of things are what I would refer to as priming the environment. You're basically looking around and trying to prime the environment for your future action to be easier. So another example, someone I know who wanted to practice guitar more. And so, if your guitar is tucked away inside the guitar bag or case, or it's in the closet or something, you never see it. So what he ended up doing was taking his guitar stand and putting it right in the middle of his living room. And then whenever he came back from guitar lessons, because the main problem was he didn't get in the habit of practicing the guitar between lessons, so they'd show up and his instructor would know you haven't done anything. So his new habit before the habit, in your phrase, is walk in from the door from the guitar lesson, place the guitar on the stand in the middle of the living room. So it's primed, it's out, it's available, it's obvious. And that's kind of what we're talking about here when we talk about a lot of these little environment design strategies, is how can you prime the environment so that your future habit is more obvious, more visible, more available, easier, frictionless. And so little things like that can be helpful.
How important is it to have a team around you that helps you with your habit? Like my son, for instance, he is a tennis player at Clemson right now. So he is a freshman. At home, it was really hard to get him to go train every day on his own, right?
Mm.
But now he's in this environment with this team. And I knew if he can get into a team environment, that team, because he's a team kind of guy, training with them and practicing every day would actually help him so much. And all of a sudden, like he's rising to a whole new level with a team around him. And he's working out every day, training every day, because he's now in this environment where
Right.
everyone's driving each other. So how important is it to do that collectively rather than individually?
Yeah, it's crucial. You see this a lot of the time, interestingly, with pro athletes. So a lot of the narrative in the general population is, oh, look at how much willpower these athletes have. Look at how amazing their ability is to persevere and grit and so on. And certainly professional athletes work incredibly hard. But if you talk to the athletes themselves, sometimes it's surprising because when they retire, you ask them like, oh, do you still train or have you kept up with the stuff or whatever? And if it was just the person being like having a ton of willpower, you would think they would still train like normal. But what a lot of them say is, no, after I retire, it's like just as hard for me as it is for everyone else because I'm no longer in this environment where I have coaches expecting things of me, personal trainers and the top tier staff making sure we're staying on course. I'm not surrounded by all my teammates who I was training with each day. So the question you ask applies not only to sports, but also to habits in general, which is that the core issue we're talking about here is that all humans have this deep desire to belong. We want to fit in, to be approved of by the tribe. We want to have the respect of those around us. And this is true not just for like personal training habits or fitness habits or for sports. It's true for everything. Like if you move to a neighborhood and you walk outside on Tuesday night and you see all your neighbors have their recycling bins out in the corner, you're like, oh, we need to sign up for recycling. That's what people like us do here, Or if you step onto an elevator, everybody turns around to face the front. Now, there's no reason it has to be that way. You could face the back, but you're like, oh, this is what we do in this little tribe that's inside this elevator right now. Same thing for like a job interview. Like if you go to a job interview, you wear something nice. You wear a suit and a tie or a dress. But there's no reason you have to do that. You could wear a bathing suit, but you don't because it violates the expectation of that group. And so the overarching insight here is that when habits go with the grain of the expectations of the tribe, they're very attractive. It's attractive for your son to go to practice each day because that's what his coaches and teammates expect to be a good player, to be a good teammate. It's attractive to a certain degree, even if you don't really want to get up at 6 a.m. to go train at the gym, if all your other teammates are doing it too, because you don't want to be the guy who misses the team workout. That's what it means to be part of that tribe. Meanwhile, if habits go against the grain of the expectations of the group, it's very unattractive because now you're doing something that grates against what other people are expecting of you. And so you see this type of thing where when people join a community, when they join a tribe, like let's say you join a CrossFit gym, they start to soak up these other habits that they weren't even there for. They start they buy certain types of knee sleeves or workout shoes. They start signing up for paleo meal plans. And they're like, I wasn't even thinking about doing that. I was just going to join a gym. But the habits of the tribe are very attractive. And so I think the ultimate punchline of this insight is that you want to join a group where your desired behavior is the normal behavior. Because if it's normal in that group, then it's going to be very attractive for you to follow it yourself.
So the people you surround yourself with and their habits really can have an impact on your habits.
100%. I mean, it's true, it's true at all levels of a tribe. It's true at the family level and like really small tribes. It's true in a larger friendship group. It's true even like for big things. Like there are certain habits for nations. We take off the 4th of July in the United States, and that's kind of what it means to be American, celebrate, living in this country and so on. And so there are all kinds of behaviors that are socially reinforced.
So my brother and I, right, same parents, we have some similar habits. Are there habits that are genetic?
So there's a chapter late in the book Atomic Habits all about genes and their impact on habits and behaviors. And I think that this is like a really fruitful future area of conversation, but I feel like we're on the cusp right now of like understanding it more. Basically, what the science, there are kind of like two things to talk about. So the first thing is we know that there is a huge genetic influence on physical traits, right? Like if you're 7 feet tall, people are like, oh, well, that's because of your genes. And a lot of the time people don't like to talk about genes and psychological traits because it starts to make it feel like it's fixed, like, oh, there's nothing I can do about it, or why bother because biological determinism or things like that. But I think that's actually the wrong lesson to take away. So the first lesson to take from this is the usefulness of your genes is heavily dependent on the context that you're in. So if you're 7 feet tall, being on a basketball court, really useful environment, incredibly helpful set of genes for that. But if you're trying to do a routine on a balance beam or do some kind of gymnastics and tumbling, very unhelpful set of genes to have. And so in a lot of ways, figuring out how to play to your strengths is really a matching problem. You're trying to figure out how to match your genetic predisposition with the right environment or context where you can succeed, like a basketball player on a basketball court. And that's true not just for physical characteristics, but for psychological ones as well. So the second takeaway is we're looking for this matching problem. And one of the ways, and again, I think there's a lot to still be discovered with this. One of the ways to do that with psychological characteristics is with personality. So there are a variety of ways to measure personality. The most robust scientific one is called the Big Five. And basically it maps personality onto 5 spectrums. The one that most people are probably familiar with is introversion on one side, extroversion on another. But there are other spectrums like your level of agreeableness or conscientiousness, which is basically how like hardworking and industrious and orderly you are, and a few others as well. And there are biological underpinnings to each of these traits. So, for example, one of my favorite studies, there were a study that was done on babies in the nursing ward, and they would play a harsh noise on one side of the room, and some of the babies would turn toward the noise, and some of the babies would turn away. And the babies that turned toward it were more likely to grow up to be extroverts, and the babies that turned away from it were more likely to grow up to be introverts. And then similarly, for agreeableness, which is basically the spectrum of like how warm and kind and considerate you are, people who are high in agreeableness tend to have higher natural levels of oxytocin. So there's actually like a hormonal difference. And you can imagine if you're the kind of person that is naturally warm and kind and considerate, it might be easier for you to build certain habits like writing thank you notes or getting friends together for social gatherings or things like that. And so this brings us to the second takeaway about genetics and habits, which is that genes do not eliminate the need for strategy. They inform your strategy. They tell you what to change or adjust based on your strengths or weaknesses. And so if you're low in agreeableness, for example, and you're not the type of person that's just going to get excited to write thank you notes or will think about it naturally, then perhaps you need more environment design things to help nudge you along. Like maybe you need to have a pre-loaded box of thank you cards sitting right on your desk so that as soon as you have the opportunity to write one, the environment is easy for you to do it because you're not going to have this natural urge to do it. And so by understanding yourself at a deeper level like that, you can improve the strategy you use for sticking to certain habits.
Brilliant. So there's been a lot of books on habits, but your book came out, mega bestseller, New York Times bestseller. It's been incredible, really well received. Why do you think that is in terms of your book versus these other books? Because again, a lot of books on habits, but yours have really resonated with everyone. Also, I think your writing has a lot to do with it, but what are some other reasons?
Yeah, thank you. It's been great to see the reception of the book. So I do think that Atomic Habits covers some things that you won't see in other books. So that's the first reason, is talking about a lot of people, and I've heard this from multiple readers, they said, I was actually a little skeptical to read this book because I thought, hasn't habits just been covered a bunch before? Like what new is going to be in there? And then they were very surprised that there actually are quite a few topics that they haven't seen before. So we just talked about one of them. I have not read any other book that talks about habits and genetics. So there's a chapter on that. There's a chapter on habits and identity, which I just kind of hinted at briefly early on, the connection there. I haven't seen that covered in another habits book. There is a whole section of 3 chapters that are about basically how behavior is driven not by reaction, but by prediction. So we often think that life is reactive. Somebody says something, I feel a certain way. Somebody does something, I respond. But in fact, life is actually much more predictive than it is reactive. And so what I mean by that is, like, you walk into a kitchen and you see a plate of cookies, and then you decide, oh, I'm going to go eat one. Well, it's actually not the cookie that gets you to walk over and approach it. It's the image or the expectation that the cookie creates in your mind. It's the fact that you predict this is going to be tasty that motivates you to take the action. And that is true for so many different things. I mean, like, why do athletes work so hard? They work so hard not because of the championship. They don't have it yet. They work because of the image of it in their mind, because the prediction about what it might feel like to win the Super Bowl or to win the World Series. It's actually just that expectation that drives them to show up every day.
Powerful.
So prediction is a huge driver of our behavior, and I haven't seen that discussed as much. That's the whole, what I call the second law in Atomic Habits. And then there are two other things I think make the book helpful. So the first one is I talk both about building good habits and breaking bad ones. A lot of the time, other habit books kind of focus on one or the other. And then finally, I mentioned this at the beginning, but I wanted this book to be both the why and the how. So why do habits form? What is the science behind them? And how do we actually change our behavior? What do we need to do? And so I think the fact that it's not just a scientific discussion, it's like a practical action guide. It will actually tell you what to do and what to change. I think that leads to it being received well also.
I love that. You gave me some great information from your writing to use in one of my books. I asked you for permission. You gave me permission. It was you went in the locker room first. I work with a lot of sports teams. When you speak to a sports team, what do you say to them to help them create championship habits? So in terms of, for the everyday person though, how can they become a champion in implementing these kind of habits that the champions do?
At a high level, so there are two answers to this. So the first one is broad. The broad answer is it's really about embracing a philosophy of continuous improvement. It's really about internalizing this idea of how can I get 1% better each day? How can I show up today and make sure that today was a net positive rather than just showing up and like staying at baseline? And what you see is that, there are tons of opportunities for that in sports. It's not just let me try to give 1% harder effort at this particular drill. There are 1% improvements in strategy and play design. There are 1% improvements in recovery. There are 1% improvements in the way that we build the culture and locker room and all things like that. So there are almost an infinite range of places that you can find those little edges, but it's really about like getting that switch flipped on where you're constantly looking for that extra margin, where you're looking for that slight advantage. Because if you're not willing to like search for it, then you're almost never going to just stumble across it. So that's the first one. And then the second one is more just a commentary on what performance looks like at elite levels. The higher that you get in any particular domain, whether it's sports or chess or business or whatever, the thinner the margin for error becomes, because everybody's good. Everybody is elite. And so, you'll see Olympians work for 4 years to shave 0.02 of a second off their time. And that is actually the difference between being first and being fourth. And so because it's so slim at the top, often what you find is that the physical gifts are there, but a lot of the battle is getting out of your way mentally. It's making sure that you are somehow in the right zone to play that day. And if you can get out of your own way, then that is often enough to rise above the other person who's equally as talented as you. And so for that reason, habits can be very useful. And this is true not just for elite athletes, but also for individuals. Habits can be very useful to prime you to get into the right mode. You'll hear athletes talk about this all the time, right? They have the same habit or routine every time they step up to the free throw line, or visualization before they get out on the court. And those habits are things that kind of like flip a switch in their mind and say, hey, it's game time, remember it's time to be in this mode. And so habits can be a useful way to kind of like have an on-ramp to that successful mental state.
A lot of people talk about routines. A lot of podcasts cover the routines of successful people. What I have found though is not everyone's routine works for you. And so how do we find the right routines and the right habits that work for us? Because for me, I'm not getting up at 5 a.m. I mean, that's just not part of my routine. That doesn't work for me. And so I believe each person has to find their own habit, their own routine that works for them. So yeah, I can listen to that person and say, oh, that's great. But how do we find what works for us?
Yeah, so there are two reasons why that's actually not that helpful. The first reason is that when you say, what does LeBron James eat for lunch, or what does Richard Branson do to, what's his morning routine or whatever. First of all, what successful people are doing now is often not what they were doing when they were at your stage, and so it in some ways can be counterproductive. Like, for example, let's say you're an 18-year-old basketball player and you're like, well, what does LeBron eat each day? I want to eat what he eats. Well, he's in year like 15 of his career, right? And he's like, maybe LeBron is actually trying to slim down a little bit to not put as much pressure on his joints and make sure that his career can last for as long as it can. Whereas when he was 18, maybe he was eating everything in sight and trying to bulk up. And so if you did what he did, it actually wouldn't be the right strategy for you. And then the second thing is that when we ask, what do successful people do? You're kind of trying to you're trying to apply a strategy that worked from the past to the present, and context changes, the environment changes. And so what was effective previously is often not where you're going to find the margin now, because it's just the standard. And so you need to be looking in a different area. But ultimately, what your question is how do we find what works for us? And I think there are a couple answers. The first answer is, to start, you can just ask yourself, what do I do on a day when things go well for me? Like what if I'm living my best day, or if I'm showing up as my best self, what are the things that day tends to include? And you'll probably find maybe 2 or 3 things that we could call a keystone habit, which is like a habit that pulls the rest of your life in line. Like for me, it's exercise is my keystone habit. I get the benefits of working out, but I have this post-workout high for like an hour or 2 after the workout where I'm real focused. I tend to sleep better because I'm tired from the workout, which means I wake up the next day and I have better energy. I eat better when I'm working out and training. My kind of internal thought is, I don't want to waste it, And at no point was I trying to build better sleep habits or nutrition habits or focus habits, but all that stuff just kind of came as a natural side effect of doing that one keystone thing. So I think that you can ask yourself, what are those 1 or 2 things for me, and focus just there and let it kind of ripple out. And then the second thing you can do is have a process of reflection and review. And this is a thing that a lot of people skip because it just seems like a little extra work, but it can really help you refine and hone in on what's working for you in the long run and what isn't. So I do an annual review at the end of each year where I ask myself, what went well this year? What didn't go well? Where am I heading toward, or what am I going to change? And I track how many workouts I did each month, what my average was, how that compared to the previous year. I look at how many articles I wrote, how that compared to the previous year, how many new places I visited. And basically, your list is going to be different, but you just pick whatever you want to track that's important to you. And by revisiting it each year, you give yourself a chance to reflect on that and then gradually kind of narrow in on what those ideal areas are for you.
Why do 87% of people fail with their New Year's resolutions? 50% fail in the first month. Can you just give a simple answer on why that happens, or perhaps it's a 3-part response?
No, I think this one actually is pretty simple. People pick habits that are too big. Choose something that is so small that it would seem silly to not do it. Like you could say, I want to join a CrossFit gym and work out 4 days a week. And that is a lot if you've been sitting on the couch for months on end. Or you could say, I'm going to do 1 push-up each day. And those are both exercise habits, but they're completely different ones. And you have a much higher likelihood of success. And it really comes back to what we were talking about near the beginning of this conversation. Build the identity first, become the type of person that shows up each day, and then you can upgrade and expand from there.
Incredible. So what are you excited about now as you move forward with this mega hit book? And are you going to write another one? Are you speaking a lot on habits? I'm sure a lot of companies and sports teams are calling you to take them to the next level.
Yeah, for sure. So I am speaking has definitely increased a lot. So I'll be doing a good amount of that in the next couple of years. The book, of course, is still very important to me, and so I'll be spreading the word about that and hopefully helping people build better habits. But we do have a couple other exciting things coming. So I have a habit journal that is coming out. I actually have the prototype right here in front of me. That's coming out in January of 2019.
Can you show that again, just for those watching?
Yeah, so it's called It's called the Clear Habit Journal.
Love it. Clear.
And it's I have one out of the packet here. And so anyway, it's basically a dot grid notebook, but it has, at the beginning, it has a section that makes it very easy to build a journaling habit. You write 1 sentence per day. I've been doing it for about a month now, and it's the first time I've actually ever stuck to journaling. And then at the back, it has a series of habit trackers where you can track your habits each day. So anyway, I'm really excited about that. So that comes out soon. And then I consider the 2 pillars of self-improvement to be habits and decision-making. And the way that I think about it is that decisions set the trajectory for you. They set the amount of leverage you have. Like if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you could choose to start a local pizza parlor, or you could choose to start like an email marketing or software company. And you're going to work hard either way because entrepreneurship is tough. But the software company probably has a higher trajectory or growth curve than the pizza parlor does. But your habits determine how far you walk along that trajectory. So it's quite possible that you could pick the pizza parlor and have really killer habits and end up with a much better business than someone who chose the software company but doesn't execute on it. And of course, what we're ultimately looking to do is to have great habits and make great decisions. And so I think I'll be writing more about decision making in the future and how that pairs with habits so that you can both create leverage for yourself and capitalize on the potential of those good decisions by building better habits.
Yeah, that's awesome. Tell me about, last question, tell me about purpose, because where does purpose, heart, spirit, passion, spiritual things drive us in our habits? Because I know for me, it's a huge part of who I am. I'm not saying it should be for everyone, but faith drives me. Purpose drives me. I know that the intention behind the habit actually allows you to create the habit. Am I right on that? So I want to just ask you, maybe challenge you on that. Where does that fit into the paradigm of habits?
So I think it comes back to this concept of identity. When you have a sense of purpose, you tend to be more clear about what your identity is, about who you want to be. I know, for example, so I played baseball in college, and baseball was a really big part of my identity then. I had a very clear purpose about what it meant to be a good teammate, to show up each day and work really hard on this thing that was important to me. And so purpose clarifies what your habits should be. It clarifies where your attention and energy should be allocated. And I think the stronger that purpose is, the more clear it becomes what trade-offs you should make. Because we all face, we all have the same amount of time in each day, and we all are forced to make trade-offs. And once you spend, this time that I'm spending with you now, I've chosen to allocate it here. I can't spend it in any other way. And those decisions that we make all throughout our day become much easier to make when your sense of purpose is clear, because the trade-offs are obvious. It's like, well, this is what my purpose is. This is clearly what I should be working on, the habits I should be building, the area I should be focused on. Whereas when you don't have that, you're kind of left in this gray zone, this like limbo where you're like, well, I could do this or I could do that, but I'm not feeling a strong leaning toward either. And so I think that clarity is the biggest thing that it provides.
James Clear, thanks for making us better today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for talking with me.